In the peaceful village of Andara, nestled between rolling hills and lush forests, the people lived simple, content lives. The village was small but tight-knit. Its people bound by tradition, respect for their elders, and an unspoken understanding that everyone had a role to play in maintaining the harmony of their home. Life moved at a slow and steady pace, marked by the changing seasons and the occasional celebration. But one thing had always unsettled the villagers: Tariq. Tariq was a man unlike any other in Andara. He had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember. But he was not quite like the other villagers. His face, weathered by years of toil under the sun, was always set in a calm expression. Yet there was something strange about the way he carried himself. Tariq's laughter, loud, clear, and often out of place, was the source of much gossip and concern among the villagers. While everyone else mourned the passing of loved ones with quiet dignity, Tariq did something that no one could understand: he laughed. His laughter echoed through the air, jarring against the heavy silence of mourning. It wasn't a nervous giggle or an uncomfortable chuckle, it was a full, hearty laugh, as if he had heard the most delightful joke at the most inappropriate time. At funerals, when others cried and lamented the loss of a friend, family member, or elder, Tariq would stand in the background, his broad smile stretching across his face, and laugh as though the death was somehow amusing. The villagers were disturbed. How could anyone laugh at such a somber occasion? Children were often frightened by his behavior, running away in fear whenever they saw him, and adults whispered behind his back, exchanging worried looks whenever his laughter rang out. Some thought he was cursed. Others believed he was simply mad. But Tariq never explained himself. He only smiled softly, then turned and walked away, leaving the villagers to wonder. Despite the mystery surrounding him, Tariq remained a constant presence in the village. His life was simple. He lived on the edge of the village, in a small, unkempt hut made of stone and thatch. He didn't interact much with the villagers, but when he did, it was always brief, and his words were few. He never stayed in one place long, always walking with a strange sort of purpose, as if he was looking for something, but what? No one knew. Over time, the villagers accepted Tariq's oddities. They had no choice. He was part of their community, and despite his behavior, there was a quiet respect for his presence. But the mystery of why he laughed at funerals remained unsolved. And as the years passed, the villagers grew accustomed to his strange presence, resigning themselves to the fact that some things in life were simply beyond understanding. That is, until the death of Chief Kato. The sun had barely risen over the hills of Andara when the news began to spread. Chief Kato, the most respected and beloved elder of the village, had passed away in his sleep during the night. The quiet hum of mourning was shattered by hushed voices carrying the tragic announcement through the village like a gust of wind. The villagers could hardly believe it. How could the wise, kind-hearted leader who had cared for everyone with such devotion be gone? Chief Kato was a pillar of the community, the one they turned to for guidance, for mediation in disputes, and for help in times of need. His presence had always been steady, like the earth beneath their feet. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The rhythmic clatter of cooking pots, the chatter of women weaving baskets, and the songs of children playing all fell silent. People began to gather outside their homes, unsure of what to do or how to process the news. It felt as if the entire village had been swallowed by a heavy, suffocating sadness. Omari, Chief Kato's only son, stood in the doorway of his family's home, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had grown up under his father's guidance, watching him help the needy, make peace between feuding neighbors, and lead with a calm wisdom that made him the heart of the village. How could such a man be taken so suddenly? Omari's heart ached with grief, and a deep sense of loss settled into his chest. But the villagers, despite their sorrow, knew that there was work to be done. Chief Kato's death would require a proper funeral, a celebration of his life and the legacy he had left behind. Plans for the funeral began immediately. A large tent was set up near the village square, where the villagers would gather to honor their chief. People worked quickly, preparing food for the ceremony and making black clothing for mourning. The priest was informed and began preparing his prayers. The mood was somber but determined. Chief Kato had been a man of great influence, and his funeral would reflect the deep love and respect the villagers had for him. Yet, there was an undercurrent of worry among the villagers, an unspoken fear. They all knew of Tarek's strange habit, and the thought of him laughing at the beloved chief's funeral filled them with dread. Would Tarek show up? If he did, would he laugh? Could anyone endure such a thing in the midst of their grief? Omari could not stop the worry gnawing at his mind. He loved his father deeply, and the thought of such a moment of disrespect on the day of his father's funeral filled him with a deep unease. He needed to prepare himself. The morning of the funeral arrived, and the village square was filled with mourners dressed in black. The air was thick with sadness, and a quiet, respectful silence hung over the gathering. The priest stood at the front, ready to begin the ceremony, while Chief Kato's family sat at the front, their faces streaked with tears. Omari sat beside his mother, holding her hand tightly, trying to find some comfort in the shared grief. Suddenly, a soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Tarek had arrived. Tarek stood at the back of the gathering, as he always did, his worn sandals kicking up dust on the ground. His shirt was as wrinkled as ever, and his eyes were unreadable as he scanned the mourners. The villagers held their breath. Some of them could not even bring themselves to look at him, as if afraid to meet his gaze, fearful of what might happen next. Tarek seemed to take no notice of the stares and whispers. He merely stood there, his posture casual, as though he were at a gathering like any other. As the priest began speaking, his voice solemn and slow, Tarek's strange laughter broke the silence. It wasn't a small laugh, one that could be easily ignored. No, Tarek's laughter was loud, booming, and unmistakable. It echoed across the village square, a sharp contrast to the somber tones of the priest's prayers. People froze, heads turned. The sound of mourning was replaced by the sound of Tarek's laugh, which grew louder with each passing moment, filling the air like a clap of thunder. Omari's heart clenched. His grief, already raw and fragile, was now mixed with a surge of anger and confusion. How could Tarek be so heartless? How could he laugh at a time like this, when the entire village was suffering the loss of the chief? Omari stood up, unable to contain his frustration any longer. His voice cracked with emotion as he shouted across the square. Tarek, why are you laughing? Why do you laugh at my father's funeral? The crowd fell into an uneasy silence, waiting for Tarek's response. His laughter subsided, but he did not stop smiling. He wiped a tear from his eye, though whether it was from his laughter or something else, no one could say. I'm not mocking your father, Tarek said, his voice calm and measured, as though speaking to a child. I laugh because I see something you do not. The villagers stared at him, their eyes wide with shock. What did he mean? What could he possibly be seeing that they could not? The air seemed to grow heavier, thick with confusion and disbelief. Tarek's words hung in the air like a riddle, and no one knew how to respond. Omari, his face flushed with anger, moved closer to Tarek. What do you mean? He demanded. Why are you laughing at a time like this? What are you trying to say? Tarek's smile remained, but his eyes grew distant. You would not understand, he said softly, but the truth is near. The spirits are restless, and their stories are waiting to be told. Without another word, Tarek turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as he had come. The villagers were left in stunned silence, their minds racing with questions. What was Tarek trying to say? What truth was he referring to? Was he simply mad, or was there something more to his laughter? Something hidden beneath his strange behavior? Omari stood there for a long time, his heart torn between anger and confusion. He had loved his father deeply, and now, even in his death, Tarek had found a way to upset his memory. But Omari couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Tarek's words held a deeper meaning, one that he couldn't quite understand. The funeral ceremony continued, but the villagers couldn't stop talking about Tarek's strange words and laughter. Some believed he was cursed by the gods, while others thought he might know something the rest of them did not. But Omari couldn't let go of one thought. Tarek had said the truth was near. What could he possibly mean by that? Little did Omari know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront secrets hidden within his own family, and the tragic events that would soon unfold in Andara. The days following Chief Kato's funeral were a blur of sadness and unanswered questions for the villagers of Andara. While they honored the memory of their beloved chief, there was an unsettling undercurrent in the village, a murmur that began to spread in hushed tones. Tarek's actions at the funeral, his sudden outburst of laughter, his cryptic words, had left an indelible mark on the people. Omari, Chief Kato's only son, could not shake the feeling that there was something important in Tarek's words. The fact that Tarek had said the truth was near, that the spirits were restless, lingered in his mind. What could Tarek have meant? Was it some sort of message? A clue to something the villagers had failed to see? Omari's grief for his father was still fresh, and he found himself caught between his sorrow and a growing determination to uncover the mystery behind Tarek's behavior. In the days that followed, Omari found little comfort in the village. His mother, too, seemed lost in her grief, and the villagers were focused on returning to their normal routines, trying to heal from the loss of their chief. But Omari could not let go of the strange encounter at the funeral. Tarek's laughter, though odd and unsettling, felt like a sign, something that could not be ignored. The more Omari thought about it, the more certain he became that Tarek knew something that they did not. The village had hardly begun to return to its normal rhythm when another tragedy struck. It was early one morning when Omari's mother received a visit from Amina's mother, a woman who lived a few huts away. Her face was tear-streaked, and she barely managed to speak through her sobs. Omari, Amina is dead, she whispered, the words barely audible. Amina had been a bright light in the village, loved by everyone for her kindness, her beauty, and her generosity. She had been the daughter of one of the wealthier families in Andara. Yet she had always treated the poor and the needy with compassion. She was one of those rare people who seemed to light up any room she entered. How could she be gone? The news was shocking, devastating. There were no words for the pain her family must have been feeling. And the village was once again filled with sorrow. The circumstances surrounding Amina's death were unclear. It had been sudden, and there was no explanation for why a young woman full of life would die so abruptly. Rumors of foul play began to circulate. Whispers of poisoning, of betrayal, floated through the village like a shadow. And, once again, Tarek's name surfaced. The villagers began to wonder, would he laugh at Amina's funeral? Just as he had at Chief Kato's. Would his laughter disrupt the mourning process once more? Omari's heart sank with dread as he thought about the upcoming funeral. Amina's death had shaken him to the core, and the thought of Tarek laughing during her memorial filled him with both anger and fear. But more than that, Omari felt a strange pull, a growing sense that Tarek's presence was no coincidence. What if, just like he had said at his father's funeral, there was something important that only Tarek knew? The day of Amina's funeral arrived, and the air was thick with grief. The entire village gathered in the familiar spot near the village square. Under a large tent draped in black cloth, Amina's family, devastated, sat at the front, their faces hidden behind their hands as they wept openly. The rest of the villagers, though trying to maintain composure, wore the same sorrowful expressions. The priest began to speak, his voice heavy with sadness as he recited prayers for Amina's soul. Omari stood near the front, his eyes fixed on the family that had suffered yet another loss. He thought of his father, of his mother's quiet sobs, and of the empty space that now existed in their village. But then, as the priest began to speak of Amina's beauty, of her kindness, the familiar sound broke through the ceremony, Tarek's laughter. It began quietly at first, almost like a cough, but it quickly grew, echoing across the mournful crowd. There was no mistaking it, Tarek was laughing again. His laughter rang out in sharp contrast to the priest's solemn words. The mourners turned toward him in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. Omari's face burned with anger. How could Tarek be so insensitive? How could he laugh when the village was grieving once again? He stepped forward, his fists clenched tightly, and shouted, "Tarek, stop! Why are you laughing? This is not a time for joy." Tarek paused, his eyes locking with Omari's. The crowd held its breath, waiting for what would come next. But Tarek simply wiped a tear from his eye, his face calm, as though he were completely unaffected by the anger swirling around him. His voice was soft but firm as he spoke. "I am not laughing at Amina's death," Tarek said, his words surprising everyone. "I laugh because the truth is near. I see what others cannot." Omari's anger flared. "What truth?" he demanded, stepping closer to Tarek. "You've said these strange things before, but you won't explain yourself. What do you mean?" Tarek's smile was gentle but knowing. The truth is hidden, Omari, and the spirits of the dead are restless. They will not be silenced until their stories are told. Omari's heart raced. What did Tarek mean? Was he claiming to know something about Amina's death? Was he suggesting that the villagers were blind to something that lay beneath the surface? And why was Tarek the only one who seemed to understand? Before Omari could ask another question, Tarek turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The villagers were left in stunned silence. Some were angered by his behavior, while others felt a sense of dread creeping over them. What was Tarek trying to tell them? What was he seeing that they could not? Omari's mind spun with questions. He had to find out the truth, whatever it was. He could not ignore Tarek's words any longer. There was something deeper at play. Something he had to uncover. He had to know why Tarek laughed. Why he spoke of the truth being near. And what he meant by the restless spirits. The funeral continued. But Omari's thoughts were far from the ceremony. He was already planning his next steps. He had to find out what Tarek knew, even if it meant uncovering things that the village wasn't ready to face. And as he watched Tarek walk away, a shiver ran down his spine. The truth was out there. But what would it cost to find it? The day after Amina's funeral, the village of Andara was a place of quiet mourning. Though the shadow of the past days lingered over the people, the death of the young woman had left an unsettling void in the village. She had been full of life, known for her kindness, and loved by everyone. Her sudden passing, coupled with Tarek's unsettling behavior at both funerals, made it impossible for the villagers to go back to their normal routines. It was as if the village itself had become a place where secrets whispered through the wind. And every shadow held a potential truth. Omari, Chief Kato's son, spent most of his days in solitude, lost in his thoughts. His father's death had shattered his world. But Amina's death felt like another blow to his already fragile heart. The strange laughter of Tarek and the cryptic messages he had left behind haunted Omari. But it was Amina's death that had started to tug at his mind in ways he couldn't ignore. Tarek had said, "The truth is near," but what did he mean by that? Omari couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Amina's death than met the eye. As the funeral had unfolded, he had noticed something unsettling. Amina had always been careful, always cautious of the people around her. She never engaged in gossip, kept to herself most times. But there was something that Omari recalled. Just a few days before her death, Amina had confided in her closest friend, Nia, that she had discovered something dangerous in the village. Amina had been afraid enough to not speak freely, but she had told Nia that she would go to the elders. She had promised that she would reveal what she had learned, but she never had the chance. Now, all Omari could think about was what Amina had uncovered and whether it was related to the strange events surrounding his father's death. Determined to uncover the truth, Omari approached Nia the following day, hoping to learn something, anything, that could explain Amina's cryptic warning. Nia, a small and quiet woman, had always been close to Amina, and Omari hoped she might know more than anyone else. The two of them sat outside, the weight of the villagers' grief pressing down on him as they spoke. Nia, do you remember what Amina said about finding something dangerous? Omari asked, his voice gentle but firm. She told you something, didn't she? Nia looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. I don't want to speak ill of the dead, she said softly, her voice trembling, but she was frightened. Amina told me she found something about someone in the village, something bad. But she didn't tell me who. She said she had to go to the elders. But she was scared. She thought that whoever she had discovered was dangerous. Too dangerous for her to confront alone. Omari's heart pounded. Could Amina's death have been a result of whatever she had uncovered? Could the secret she had learned be connected to his father's death? He pressed Nia for more details. But she couldn't offer anything else. She didn't know who Amina had been speaking of. Only that she had been afraid. Do you think she knew something about my father? Omari asked, his voice strained. I don't know, Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't think Amina's death was an accident. I think someone in this village is hiding something. Something they don't want anyone to know. The weight of Nia's words hit Omari hard. He stood up, determination flooding through him. He had to get to the bottom of this. Not just for Amina, but for his father. There was something in the village, some secret, that had claimed the lives of 2 people. And he was going to find out what it was. Omari began his investigation. He visited the village's elders and close friends of his father's, asking about any unusual occurrences in the last days of Chief Cato's life. What had his father done before his death? Had he been acting strange? Had anyone noticed anything? Most of the elders shrugged and said that nothing seemed unusual. But Omari didn't give up. He continued to dig deeper, questioning his father's closest friend, Okoro, an elderly man who had often spent time with Chief Cato. Okoro, who had been with Omari's father in the last few days before his death, hesitated when asked about the chief's final days. Your father, he wasn't himself toward the end, Okoro said, looking down at his hands. He complained about a strange bitter taste in his food. Said the food didn't taste right. But he thought it was nothing at first. But it kept happening, day after day. I thought it was just old age playing tricks on him. Omari's blood ran cold. Could it be poison? The thought gnawed at him. If his father had been poisoned, was that the cause of his death? Could Tarek have been right all along? Had the truth been hidden right under their noses? Do you think it was poison? Omari asked urgently. Okoro's eyes grew wide. I don't know for sure, Omari, but something wasn't right. Your father was strong. He shouldn't have died like that. And Amina, she had been fine too. She was so full of life. This village, something is wrong. Omari felt a rising dread in his chest. Amina's death, his father's death, it couldn't be a coincidence. Someone in the village had to be responsible. But who, and why? Determined to uncover the truth, Omari turned to another potential source of information, Adaku, the village herbalist who had prepared remedies for his father in his final days. She had been there when Chief Cato had complained of his stomach pains. Could she have noticed something strange? When Omari approached her, her eyes grew wide with nervousness, and she seemed hesitant to speak. I remember, Omari, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father came to me for help. He was complaining of stomach pains. I gave him a mixture of herbs to ease the pain. But I suspected something was wrong. I suspected it might have been poison. Omari felt his knees weaken. Poison. It was real. And it was the same thing that had likely taken Amina's life. The puzzle was starting to come together. But who would do such a thing? Who could want to kill his father? And why? Was it the same person who had killed Amina? I should have told you sooner, Omari, Adaku said, her eyes filled with regret. But I didn't want to believe it. I thought I was just imagining things. But now I see the truth. Your father, Amina, they didn't die from natural causes. Omari thanked Adaku, his mind spinning with the information. He now knew that both his father and Amina had been poisoned. And the question gnawed at him, who would do such a thing? As he walked away from the herbalist's hut, Omari's thoughts turned back to Tarek. The strange man who laughed at funerals had known more than anyone else. And as much as Omari hated to admit it, Tarek had been right about one thing, the truth was near. But would he be able to find it before it was too late? The weight of everything Omari had learned in the past few days felt unbearable. He stood at the edge of the village, gazing out over the fields and hills, the early morning mist creeping through the tall grass. His thoughts were a storm, swirling with anger, fear, and confusion. His father had been poisoned, Amina had been poisoned, and someone in this village was responsible. But who, and why? The more Omari thought about the events, the more certain he became, the truth was near. Just as Tarek had said. But who else could see it? Who else knew what had really happened? Omari had spent the last few days speaking to the villagers, piecing together fragments of information. But it wasn't enough. His father had been beloved. And so had Amina. But somewhere, hidden in the shadows, there was a betrayal, one that ran deep into the fabric of the village. The more Omari uncovered, the more he felt like he was getting closer to something terrible. Tarek's words echoed in his mind. The spirits of the dead are restless. What did he mean by that? Was Tarek truly seeing something the rest of them couldn't? Or was he simply playing games with the villagers' grief? Omari's anger flared, and for the first time since his father's death, he felt a deep sense of resolve. He couldn't stop now. He had to know the truth. No matter where it led him. No matter how dangerous it became. He had to bring the murderer to justice. The first place Omari knew he had to go was to Tarek's hut. Tarek had always been a mystery. A man who had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember but had never truly become a part of it. He had laughed at funerals, spoken in riddles, and seemed to know things that others didn't. Omari knew that if anyone could help him uncover the truth, it would be Tarek. But would Tarek be willing to share what he knew? Omari made his way through the village, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached Tarek's small, ramshackle hut on the edge of the village. It was a place most people avoided. But Omari had no time for fear or hesitation. He had to confront Tarek. He had to find out what Tarek knew about his father's death and Amina's. Tarek was sitting outside his hut, as he often did, gazing out at the horizon, his face impassive. When Omari approached, Tarek turned his head slowly, his eyes unreadable. "You're here," Tarek said, his voice calm. "I wondered how long it would take for you to come." Omari stood before him, his fists clenched at his sides. "Tarek, I know you know something," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "I know you saw something. My father, Amina, they didn't die of natural causes. They were poisoned. You said the truth was near. And I need to know what you meant. I need to know what happened." Tarek's eyes softened, and for a moment, Omari thought he saw something else in him, a glimmer of understanding. Or perhaps pity. Tarek stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. "I knew this day would come," Tarek said softly. "I've seen it before, when the dead are restless. When their stories aren't told. The truth lingers like a shadow. And that shadow is heavy." Omari's heart raced. "What do you mean? What is the truth?" Tarek smiled faintly. "The truth is hidden in plain sight, Omari. But it's not something you can just ask for. It's something you have to discover on your own. The spirits of your father and Amina are not at peace. They have unfinished business." Omari felt a chill run through him. "What kind of business? What are you saying?" Tarek turned away from Omari and walked toward the edge of the clearing. "Your father's death wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a random tragedy. It was planned. Someone wanted him gone, someone who thought they could get away with it. And Amina, she knew something. She had found out what others were hiding." Omari felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. Who did this? Was it someone in the village?" Tarek didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared out into the distance, his face unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "Not everyone in this village is as they seem, Omari," he said softly. "Some people wear masks, pretending to be something they're not. But the truth always comes to light, no matter how deep it's buried." Omari's frustration boiled over. "Stop with the riddles. I need answers. Who killed my father? Who killed Amina?" Tarek turned to face Omari, his eyes piercing. "I've already told you more than I should. The truth is near, but it's not something I can give you. You have to find it yourself. Just as I did." Omari's anger flared, but something in Tarek's expression stopped him. Tarek wasn't playing games, he was trying to guide Omari. Show him something that would unlock the truth. But what? How? "You're asking the wrong questions, Omari," Tarek continued. "The answers are not in the past. They are in the present. You must open your eyes, listen to the whispers, and pay attention to what's around you. The truth isn't far away. It's right here, in this village, but it's hidden by those who don't want it to be found." Omari stood there, his fists clenched, as Tarek's words echoed in his mind. Was Tarek trying to tell him something specific? Was there someone in the village who knew more than they were letting on? Omari couldn't stop now, he had to keep digging, no matter the cost. "Thank you," Omari said finally, his voice tight with frustration. "I'll find the truth. I won't stop until I do." Tarek nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting Omari's response. "The truth will find you, Omari," he said softly, "but be careful. The truth is dangerous. It can destroy everything you know." With that, Tarek turned and disappeared into his hut, leaving Omari standing alone in the clearing, more determined than ever to uncover the hidden secrets of the village. Omari walked back to the heart of the village, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was right in front of him, just out of reach. And as he walked, he couldn't help but feel the weight of Tarek's warning, the truth would destroy everything. But what choice did he have? He had to know. He had to find out who had killed his father, Who had killed Amina, and why? The village seemed to close in around him, its silent walls hiding dark secrets that were waiting to be uncovered. And Omari knew, deep down, that the answers he was searching for were more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The next morning, Omari woke with a burning resolve in his chest. Tariq's cryptic words were still fresh in his mind. The truth is near. But you have to discover it yourself. What did it all mean? Tariq's guidance was clear. He had pointed Omari in the direction of the truth. But it was up to him to follow the trail, to uncover the pieces of the puzzle that were buried under layers of grief and deception. Omari couldn't ignore the feeling that the villagers had been hiding something. That there was a secret within the very heart of Andara, and that secret was tied to his father's death and Amina's. The more Omari thought about it, the more certain he became. The answer was in the village. It was right under their noses. But no one seemed to want to see it. He decided to revisit the places he had already been, to ask the same questions again, and this time, to look deeper. His first stop was to speak with Okoro again. His father's closest friend. Okoro had been with Chief Kato in the final days of his life and had known him better than anyone. If anyone had noticed anything unusual, it would be him. Omari arrived at Okoro's house just as the sun was rising. The old man was sitting outside, sipping tea, his face lined with years of wisdom and hard work. He looked up as Omari approached, his eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. Good morning, Omari. Okoro greeted him softly. I know you've been asking questions about your father. I need to know more, Omari said urgently, sitting down beside Okoro. Okoro, please, I need to know everything. What happened to my father? You were with him. Did he act strange? Was there anything unusual? Okoro's face tightened with the question. He put down his cup of tea and looked at Omari with a sadness that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Your father was a strong man, Omari, but in the days before his death, he wasn't himself. He complained of a bitter taste in his food, and he seemed off. He didn't say much about it, but it was enough to make me worry. I thought it was just age catching up with him. But now I'm not so sure. Omari's heart pounded. Could it have been poison? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Okoro didn't respond immediately. He stared at Omari, his eyes filled with regret. I don't want to believe it, Omari. I don't want to think that someone could have poisoned your father. But, yes, it's possible. And if your father was poisoned, then Amina, she may have been poisoned too. Omari felt a cold chill run through him. The pieces were starting to come together. But he still didn't have all the answers. He needed more. He needed to know who had done this. And why. I need to know more. Okoro, Omari insisted. I need to know who would want to harm my father, and Amina. Okoro's gaze flickered nervously. I don't know, Omari. There are too many secrets in this village. People wear masks. People hide their true faces. Omari stood up, frustration bubbling to the surface. Someone knows. Someone in this village is responsible. And I will find out who. After leaving Okoro's house, Omari's mind spun with the possibilities. Poison. The bitter taste in his father's food. Someone in the village must have had access to his meals. Omari knew he had to follow the trail, no matter how dangerous it became. His next step was to speak to Adaku, the village herbalist who had prepared his father's remedies. She had been present when Chief Kato had complained of his stomach pains. Omari needed to hear more from her, to see if she could provide him with any further details that might point him in the right direction. Adaku's hut was small, tucked away on the outskirts of the village. The air around it was thick with the smell of herbs and medicines. And Omari felt a knot form in his stomach as he approached. He had already spoken to her, but now he had to dig deeper. Adaku, Omari called softly as he entered her hut. I need your help again. Adaku turned slowly, her face pale and drawn. Omari, I've told you everything I know. I can't help you more. But Omari wasn't giving up that easily. You knew something was wrong with my father's health. You said it felt like poison. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Adaku's eyes darted nervously around the room. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be the one to tell you your father had been poisoned. I didn't want to cause you more pain. Omari took a deep breath. But now I need to know everything. If you can help me, Adaku, if you can remember anything that could help me understand who did this. You have to tell me. Adaku hesitated for a long moment. Her face twisted in thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. There was something strange. Omari, the last time I prepared medicine for your father, your uncle came to the hut. He insisted on preparing a special meal for your father. Something he said was a family recipe. He said it would help your father feel better. Omari's stomach twisted. My uncle? He asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. Are you telling me my uncle had something to do with this? Adaku nodded slowly. I don't know for sure, Omari, but it's strange. He insisted on preparing the food himself. He said it was an old recipe passed down from your father's family. He didn't want anyone else to touch it. Omari's mind raced. His uncle, Juma, the same man who had always been close to his father. The one who had argued with Chief Kato about land before his death. Could it be? Could his uncle have been involved in his father's death? I need to speak to him, Omari said, his voice hardening with resolve. I need to confront him. But as Omari left Adaku's hut, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the edge of something far darker than he had ever imagined. His uncle, the one person who had always been there, the one who had always seemed so trustworthy, could he really have killed his own brother? Could he have been involved in Amina's death as well? As Omari made his way to his uncle's house, his heart pounded in his chest. He was getting closer to the truth, but each step he took felt like a step closer to danger. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. When Omari reached his uncle's house, he didn't wait. He barged in without knocking, his face filled with determination. Uncle Juma, Omari said, his voice tight with anger. I know you were involved in my father's death. I know you poisoned him. Juma's face went pale. He rose to his feet slowly, his expression a mixture of shock and guilt. Omari, you don't know what you're talking about. Omari stepped closer, his fists clenched. Tell me the truth, uncle. Did you poison my father? Juma's face darkened. Yes, he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. I did it. I never wanted to kill him. But he was going to sell the land. And I couldn't let him. I couldn't let him take everything I worked for. Omari felt a wave of anger and disbelief crash over him. You killed your own brother for land. Juma bowed his head. I was wrong, Omari. I was foolish. But I didn't mean for it to go this far. When Amina found out about it, she threatened to tell the elders. She knew what I had done. I had to stop her. Omari's breath caught in his throat. You killed Amina too? Juma nodded slowly. I didn't want to, but she would have exposed me. I couldn't let her ruin everything. Omari's chest tightened with rage and betrayal. His own uncle had killed his father and Amina. And now, the truth was out. Your lies end here, uncle, Omari said, his voice steady and cold. You will face justice for what you've done. Omari stood there in stunned silence, his heart hammering in his chest. His uncle, Juma, the man who had been like a second father to him, the man who had been a trusted friend to his father, was the very person responsible for the deaths of both Chief Kato and Amina. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Omari could have imagined. He looked at Juma, his once great uncle, who now stood before him with his head bowed, his face filled with guilt. But guilt didn't change the truth. And the truth was that Juma had destroyed everything Omari had believed in. His family, his trust, his very sense of security, shattered in an instant. You killed him, Omari said, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with both disbelief and anger. You killed my father for land. And Amina, you killed her because she found out. Juma's eyes welled with tears. But there was no redemption in his face. I never meant for things to go this far, Omari. I thought I could control it. I thought I could keep everything from falling apart. But your father, he was going to sell the land. He was going to give it all away. Everything that had been built for generations. I couldn't let him. Omari stepped back, his eyes narrowing. And Amina, what did she have to do with this? Juma sighed deeply, his voice breaking. She knew, Omari. She found out about the poison. She overheard me talking to Ada, the herbalist. She had figured it all out. I knew she would go to the elders. She was the only one who could expose me. Omari felt a surge of fury rise up inside him. So you killed her to silence her. You murdered her just to protect yourself. The words seemed too horrible to believe. But there was no denying the truth in Juma's admission. Juma hung his head. I didn't want to, but I couldn't risk her ruining everything. She was going to tell them. She was scared. Omari, she said she had discovered something dangerous. But she didn't tell me what it was. I couldn't let her go to the elders. So his voice trailed off, unable to finish the confession. Omari's breath caught in his throat. She knew it was you. She was going to reveal you. And you took her life to cover your tracks. Juma's voice trembled with regret. I was foolish. I was desperate. The poison, it wasn't meant to kill right away. It was slow, gradual. I thought if I gave him just a little bit at a time, your father would get weaker. And then he would just die naturally. But when you were there, when you confronted me about it, I knew it was all over. I panicked. Omari's eyes burned with unshed tears, his heart aching for the man who had once been his role model. His mentor. You betrayed us all, Omari whispered, his voice filled with both sadness and anger. You killed my father and Amina, and now you're going to pay for it. Juma looked up, his face drawn and pale. Please, Omari, I never meant for any of this to happen. I was weak, and I thought I could control it. I didn't want to kill them. I didn't want to destroy the family. But now, everything is lost. Omari didn't feel any sympathy for him. The man who had been like a father to him was gone, replaced by a murderer. A traitor, who had taken the lives of those Omari loved. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming. You have to face justice, Omari said, his voice cold. This is bigger than family. You took the lives of two innocent people. Uncle, you will answer for what you've done. Juma bowed his head, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. I know, what I've done. It can't be undone. But please, Omari, don't let this ruin you too. Let me take the punishment. The village must know the truth. But I can't change what I've done. Omari looked at his uncle one last time before turning away. He didn't want to hear any more of Juma's pleas. He didn't want to hear excuses or regret. There was no redemption for a man who had destroyed his family for greed. A man who had killed to protect his selfish desires. Omari knew what he had to do. I'll tell the elders, Omari said, his voice steady. They need to know the truth. And you need to face the consequences of your actions. Juma didn't respond. He simply lowered his head, accepting the fate he had created for himself. Omari turned and walked out of his uncle's house, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. The village had been deceived. The people had been lied to. And the truth had been hidden for far too long. But now, it was time to expose it all. As Omari made his way toward the village square, where the elders gathered, he felt the full force of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. The village was about to learn the truth. It would change everything. Some would be angry, some would be in disbelief. But Omari knew it had to be done. He arrived at the gathering place. The elders already gathered beneath the shade of the large tree. They looked up as he approached, their eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Omari, Elder Mossi said, his voice gentle but firm. What brings you here today? Omari stood tall, his voice unwavering as he addressed the elders. I have come to tell you the truth, he said, his eyes scanning the group. The truth about my father's death, and about Amina. The elders exchanged wary looks, sensing the gravity in Omari's voice. What do you mean? Elder Mossi asked. Omari took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. My father was poisoned, and Amina was killed because she discovered the truth. The person responsible for both deaths is my uncle, Juma. A gasp ran through the crowd. Elder Mossi stood up, his face pale with shock. What are you saying, Omari? This is unbelievable. It's true, Omari insisted. Juma poisoned my father. He didn't want him to sell the land. And he couldn't let Amina expose him. So he killed her too. The elders were silent for a long moment, taking in Omari's words. Elder Mossi's face was grim. This is a grave accusation. Omari, are you certain of this? Omari nodded firmly. I spoke to Juma myself. He confessed. He admitted to everything. The village elders were stunned into silence. But it was clear that they understood the severity of what Omari had just revealed. They had known Juma for many years. And the betrayal cut deep. We will investigate this further, Elder Mossi said, his voice filled with authority. But for now, we must take action. Juma must be held accountable for his actions. Omari nodded, a sense of resolution settling in his chest. The truth was out. The village would know what had happened, and Juma would face justice for his crimes. Omari had done what he had to do, not just for his father. Not just for Amina, but for the entire village. The darkness had been lifted, and the healing could begin. As the elders began their discussion, Omari walked away, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of peace. The truth had finally come to light. His father and Amina could finally rest in peace. And the village of Andara, once broken by lies and betrayal, could begin to heal.